My father once said to me, "When you grow up, I expect you to be a better man than I am." Although I was only 10 when he died, I was old enough to realize the impossibility of this. However successful I may have been as a museum official, I am in most respects a quite insignificant person. I haven't a spark of imagination. I sometimes look despairingly at these useless hands of mine, which have never been taught to fashion a single thing. Perhaps that's why I've always tried to be with people better than myself. And never did a man have such a galaxy of kind and dear friends. Perhaps that's why I go on enjoying my life to such a preposterous degree. I like people of various kinds and keep my friends in separate boxes. What I chiefly demand of them is understanding and character. If they also have looks, wit, and morals of some kind, however unconventional, so much the better. Some of my friends I have to keep apart. Others I try to bring together.
Dear Mr. Cockerell, this is to let you know that Mr. and Mrs. Shaw came to see me yesterday afternoon. Oh, they were charming. We discussed his place in Joan with other subjects in a most interesting conversation.
Dame Laurentia McLaughlin of Stanbrook Abbey, one of my dearest and closest friends.
Dame. Why is she called Dame?
Why is who called what?
Dame. Why is she called Dame?
There's no need to shout.
You're going deaf.
Nonsense. What did you say?
The road that led us to Stanbrook Abbey was little more than an oozy quagmire. It had been raining heavily. I'd gone there because Sidney Cockerell had urged me to do so. He was then director of the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge and had a wide circle of friends with whom he corresponded very regularly.
I told Dame Laurentia that I'd known Bernard Shaw for many years and regarded him not only as one of the cleverest, but one of the best and honestest of living Englishmen.
Irishman. I was asking about your friend, the nun. Why is she called Dame?
It's just a form of address, that's all.
Like monks calling themselves Dom?
Exactly.
I was most surprised when we were shown into the parlour there. I had no idea that Dame Laurentia would be shielded from us by an iron grill.
The community at Stanbrook is enclosed.
It was an odd experience. I'd never talked through bars before. But Charlotte and I, we liked her very much.
Will you go to see her again?
No, never. How long has she been in there?
Almost 50 years.
What? Well, that alters the case entirely. I'll go whenever I can.
I am now in possession of my own copy of St. Joan, adorned with the inscription to Sister Laurentia from Brother Bernard. Mr. Shaw is becoming quite monastic. St. Joan is a wonderful play, reaching in its simplicity a high degree of art which must have cost much labor. Joan herself is beautifully portrayed. However, Mr. Shaw's version of the trial does not please me. He is far too sympathetic to the Protestants.
My dear Sister Laurentia, in reading heathen literature such as mine, you must remember that I am not addressing an audience exclusively Catholic. It includes not only Protestants, but Indians and Orientals. If I wrote strictly from a Catholic point of view, my book would reach no further than the penny lives of the saints that they sell in the churches of Ireland. I want my sound to go out to all lands.
Shaw once told me he always composed in shorthand. His text was then typewritten by his secretary.
I let the play write itself and shape itself. Quite often I don't know what's going to happen on the next page.
Well, what about the plot? How do you think of that?
I never invent a plot. Plot has always been the curse of serious drama, and indeed of serious literature of any kind.
How extraordinary.
Extraordinary?
You make it sound so easy.
But so it is. When people ask me, is it difficult to write plays, I always reply that it is either easy or impossible. It may be laborious, that's quite another matter. But unless the novice can do it from the very first, without any serious difficulty or uncertainty, he'd better not do it at all. It's not his job.
Last Friday, I had another visit from Brother Bernard and Mrs. Shaw. He looks amazingly young and fresh with the blue eyes of a child. And I do like him. He has such a pretty knack of turning on one with a whimsical smile, just when you think you've caught him. It's so good of them both to come and see the likes of me. He brought me a copy of the Apple Cart, which I read with great delight. Oh, what dialogue. Act 2 interested me very much. Under that cold, clear as ice brain, I find a good deal of emotion.
I am not aware of any emotional episode in Brother Bernard's life, and I'd always supposed that he never had an entanglement from which he could not retreat at will.
I found sex hopeless as a basis for permanent relations. Never dreamt of marriage in connection with it. On the other hand, I liked sexual intercourse because of its amazing power of producing a celestial flood of emotion and exaltation of existence, which, however momentary, gave me a sample of what may one day be the normal state of being for mankind in intellectual ecstasy.
You know, I never kissed a woman till I was 28, and then she kissed me first. Since then, I've been on kissing or caressing terms with a great many women, but only had the final intimacy with one of them, my wife, whom I married when I was 40. Before that, poverty protected me from matrimony. As it happened, I was strongly sexed, and my chastity was severely tried. I've never quite been able to make up my mind whether my abstention was prompted by honorable scruples or fear of the possible consequences.
At one time, I thought that the only sensible way of finding a wife was to advertise for one. Wanted. A reasonably healthy woman of about 60, accustomed to plain vegetarian cooking, able to read and write well enough to forward letters to her husband when he's away, but otherwise uneducated. Must be plain-featured and of an easy, unjealous temperament. And all relatives, if possible.
A nun ought to be a brave person, not just a nice little thing. We are called out of this world to work for God, to bear things for him, to endure what it pleases him to inflict on us in the way of trials, spiritual or otherwise. We may have tried not to hear the call, to silence it even, but the gentle voice has persisted in its appeal, and here we are.
Dear Sister Laurentia, I am a man without any set creed. Too much in sympathy with all the great religions to adhere exclusively to one. Too much in awe of the great mysteries to accept any solution of them. The worst of believing in only one religion is that it leads you to regard all other religions as wrong. I prefer to think that there is an element of truth, larger or smaller, in them all. It is my belief that the three greatest men the world has produced are Jesus, Michelangelo, and Alexander the Great, in that order. I tell you all this so that you may realize what manner of infidel you are dealing with.
You'll be surprised, and I hope delighted to know that I'm about to become a pilgrim.
What sort of pilgrim?
I'm off to the Holy Land. Jerusalem, Nazareth, Bethlehem, Damascus.
You must take me with you.
I wish I could.
In spirit. You must let my spirit roam about the holy places I've never seen, yet seem to know so well.
I will.
And lay my love and reverence at our Lord's feet. Bring me back a little memento from Calvary. Please.
In the 1890s, I went to Italy with Shaw. The trip was organized by the Art Workers Guild, and there were about 30 of us, all men. GBS was not very enthusiastic about Venice, St. Mark's, he thought, would make an ideal railway station. I suffered greatly from mosquito bites and fleas. Shaw said the only remedy was to perspire freely, thus giving the fleas rheumatism, a hideously unpleasant ailment for an insect that has to jump for its life every few seconds.
It is St. Patrick's Day, and I am in Damascus. I asked myself whether I should persuade Sister Laurentia to get herself a tailor-made short skirt, gaiter boots, a Fair Isle pullover, a field glass and camera, a sun umbrella lined with red, a Revelation suitcase, and hasten hither to see for herself what she has only imagined at Stanbrook. I leave that question unanswered. But I'll tell you what might happen to you because it has happened to me. You would enter the Holy Land at night, with the sky full of strange new constellations and all the old ones topsy-turvy, but with the stars soft and large and down quite close overhead in a sky that you feel to be of a deep and lovely blue. When the light comes, you have left the land of Egypt with its endlessly flat delta utterly behind, and you are in a hilly country, with patches of cultivation wrested from the omnipresent stones. And in this landscape, the sight of a woman with an infant in her arms takes on the quality of a vision. Here you feel that Christ lived and grew up. Here Mary bore and reared him. And that there is no land on earth quite like it. For this first hour, you will not improve. Later on, the guides try to be more exact. This, they say, is the stable of the inn. That's the carpenter shop. And up there, that's the room in which the Last Supper was served. Yeah, but you know that they're romancing. There isn't a scrap of evidence. But later on, I swam in the lake of Tiberias with the pleasant sense that this, at least, was Christ's lake, and that here no one could stake out the track on which he walked or the site from which the miraculous draught of fishes was hauled. It's better to have Christ everywhere than somewhere, especially somewhere when he probably wasn't. The hills rise up almost into the mountains over the train to Jerusalem, which winds between them so sinuously that you can see its tail from the window. But when you arrive, you're surprised. The place has a flourishing, modern, suburban air, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, to eyes accustomed to Western architecture of the same period, is a second-rate affair. And the squabbling of the sects over their rights in it is not edifying. But I duly squeezed myself into the place, and I tipped the queerly robed priest who touched my hands with oil, trying to look as credulous as I could so as not to hurt his feelings. But my thought was, you'll be disappointed. So, for the rest of the day, I damned Jerusalem up hill and down dale. And when they took me to the Mount of Olives and showed me the famous view of the city, my only comment was, it's just like Buxton. But one's appreciation is more complex than that. When you stand on the stone from which the ascension took place, you feel everything that the legend intends you to feel, and at the same time a purely comic amusement at the notion of Jesus going up to the highest attainable point as a taking off place for his celestial flight. What's your faith and your tourist observation, they jostle one another in the queerest fashion.
Dear Brother Bernard, you have made me feel that I have seen the Holy Land through your eyes and have revealed a good deal more than I would have seen with my own. You know, I'm not in the least disturbed that the sacred spots cannot be identified. No, it would hurt much more if our Lord were to be localized in Palestine, if there were to be a Christian Mecca. The earth is the Lord's, and he is everywhere spiritually, and most truly accessible.
You asked for a relic from Calvary, But Calvary now is only a spot on a church pavement, jealously guarded, with nothing removable about it. Where the real Calvary is, nobody knows, for the hills outside the city are innumerable. The alleged Via Dolorosa I traversed in a motor car, hooting furiously at the children to get out of my way. So off I went to Bethlehem. And from the threshold of the Church of the Nativity, I picked up a little stone. A scrap of limestone rock that certainly existed at the time that Jesus' feet pattered about upon it, and the feet of Mary pursued him to keep him in order. In fact, I picked up two little stones. One to be thrown blindfold among the others in Stanbrook Garden, so that there may always be a stone from Bethlehem there, and nobody will know which it is and be tempted to steal it. And the other for your own self.
Brother Bernard gave us this. Isn't it beautiful?
Very, very beautiful.
It's a reliquary, do you see? For the little stone he brought back from Bethlehem.
There's no inscription.
Should there be?
Well, wouldn't it be a good idea? A brief inscription explaining its purpose and saying who it's from.
Perhaps we should ask Brother Bernard what he thinks.
Cockerell is a heathen atheist. A reliquary is no more to him than a football cup. What the devil? Saving your cloth. Could we put on it? We couldn't put our names on it, now could we? I mean, that seems to me perfectly awful. An inscription explaining its purpose? If we could explain its purpose, we could explain the universe. I couldn't. Could you? And if Cockerell thinks that he can, and he's quite capable of it, let him try and submit the result to the Pope. Dear sister, our fingerprints are on the stone, and heaven knows whose footprints are on it. Isn't that enough?
Dear Brother Bernard, this is to let you know how much the beautiful reliquary is admired and appreciated by Lady Abbess and all the nuns. You know, by making such a gift to a place like this, you expose yourself to the danger of being prayed for very earnestly.
Oh, I don't mind being prayed for. When I tinker with my wireless set, I realize that all the sounds in the world are in my room. I catch them as I alter the wavelength receiver, French, German, Italian, unknown tongues. The ether must be full of prayers, too. And if I were God, I could tune into them all. Nobody can tell what influence these prayers have. And if there are impulses of goodwill out there in the ether towards me, so much the better for me. And it'd be shockingly unscientific to doubt it.
I was a passionate collector from my cradle. I collected everything. Mosses, butterflies and moths, insects of every kind, shells, fossils, stamps, everything. And later, there were books. Books, fine printing, and old manuscripts. I made use of my natural instinct for collecting to help a number of wealthy connoisseurs to acquire rare and ancient manuscripts. Among these collectors was my friend Dyson Perrins, Perrins of Lee and Perrins, the Worcester sauce people. On the eve of Epiphany 1907, we motored over to examine a 13th century English Psalter, which was on loan to the nuns of Stanbrook Abbey. That was my very first visit to Stanbrook, and my first sight of you. I was aware that the nuns had a printing press in the Abbey and that their work was of the very highest order.
Printing is an eminently monastic occupation. And the Stanbrook Abbey Press is not just an artistic hobby, it is an integral part of our life of dedication and prayer.
Yes, I was deeply impressed by your scholarship. And the faces of the nuns showed me that they were serenely happy, although so much removed from the world and its wonders. That first visit to Stanbrook set me thinking a good deal.
The daughters of St. Benedict have a reputation of a love of study, although they like to remain quiet and hidden. And you are quite right in saying that we are intensely happy. The monastic life is a world of its own, full of wonders of its own, full of reality and full of interest. Of course, all such happiness presupposes a call to the life.
Tell me how you spend your days. I have no idea what you do.
Well, no, what do you imagine?
Imagine? Oh, well, I imagine many hours of prayer, of music, choir in the chapel, simple meals, contemplation, walks in the garden, quietude, tranquility.
There's rather more to it than that. Our life is very busy. We rise at 5, Lord's is at 5:30, at 6 there's half an hour of prayer, and then the knock is given for sung prime, then early mass, and at 7:45 breakfast, a cup of tea. We always drink standing up, and then there's an hour of manual labour, cleaning out our cells, the dormitories, the church, and that is horrible. If you're not used to it, you get frightful housemaid's knee. Solemn Mass at 9, preceded by terce, or terce and sext, or terce, sext, and nones. 10:15, we read from the chapters, then there's an hour of study, 11:30, dinner, and then an hour of recreation. At 1:30, we have our work to do, and that might be mending, embroidery, working at the looms. We make all our own habits. And then there's fruit gathering, lavender gathering, gardening, of course. We grow our vegetables and herbs, and the cows and the pigs to be fed, and the poultry. And our work at the press keeps us busy too. Oh, translating, scribing, very many, very demanding jobs. 2:45 tea, 3 o'clock vespers, 3:30. Conference in the chapter house, 4:30 study, reading, prayer. 6 o'clock, supper, and then recreation. Stroll in the garden, perhaps. 7:30 compline, 8:30 matins, and then we go to bed. Usually between 10 and 10:30, and it's the same every day, 365 days of the year. No holidays and no days off.
I'm exhausted. Did you always intend to lead this sort of life?
Oh, no, by no means. But I was at school here, you see, and in those days I was a nun-hater. I was quite convinced I'd never want to be one. And then at Christmas, my father wrote me a letter. "Are you happy?" he asked. Well, I chewed my pen, looked at the question from every angle, wanted to say I was miserable. But I had to tell him the truth. I picked up my pen and I wrote quickly, "Yes, I am very happy." But that question of his persisted. I considered it more deeply than I'd ever considered anything before, and then I realized our Lord was asking for my heart. I could not keep it from him.
My brief visit to Stanbrook yesterday was quite perfect. What a treat to see you. and that lovely singing will never quite die out of my heart. On my way driving home, I saw hares playing in the fields, 9 of them at one time, and larks and plovers overhead, and I thought of you. I was sorry to think that you were cut off from all the thrill it gave me. Am I not to be sorry that you miss these things?
You must not think of us as being caged. We don't answer a bit to that description. The only place where there is an impression of cutting off is the parlor. And we look on the grill as a barrier, not to keep us in, but to keep you out.
I admit we are all caged in some way, and that you are free from some of the shackles that bind other women. And as for keeping me out, well, I accept that situation cheerily. And if you like, you may say that it is I who am the prisoner on the wide earth. I love the fight, such easy part as I take in it, and would not be behind a grill, sheltered from all the thorns and thistles for anything.
You don't imagine, do you, that in the religious life we avoid thorns and thistles? Communities often undergo severe trials of some sort or another. To begin with, 84 people cannot live together without occasional sparks being struck off. I sometimes think it's a miracle to have all these nuns living together day in, day out, and not to have had one murder yet.
I can see that the life that you chose when you were so young has been full of blessings. But if you were to have the choice again, would you repeat it?
Oh, yes. Yes, most certainly I would. I sometimes marvel at the wisdom I displayed in making the choice. I was young and fairly foolish, and terribly fond of pleasure. But perhaps my youth had something to do with the wisdom I displayed, because I think the young often have a clearness of vision as to what is the right thing for them.
Like you, I would ask no better than to repeat my life, mistakes, follies, and all, knowing how much more than my proper share of good fortune I've had. And as for temptations, well, I'm glad to have had them too, though I may sometime have fallen.
You're quite right, of course, in saying that we're all caged. The question is, what kind of people are the most free, or the least caged? The answer will depend on what we understand by freedom.
As for me, I dread success. To have succeeded is to have finished one's business on this earth. Like the male spider who is killed by the female at the moment he has succeeded in his courtship. I like a state of continual becoming, with a goal in front and not behind. And then too, I like fighting successful people, attacking them, rousing them, testing their mettle, kicking over their sandcastles so as to make them build stone ones. It develops one's muscles, and you learn from it. A man never tells you anything until you contradict him.
A few weeks after my first visit to Stanbrook, I suddenly decided to marry Miss Kingsford, Kate. She was a talented artist with a special gift for illuminating manuscripts. Some of her work was very fine and gave me the greatest pleasure. I bought her an emerald engagement ring, having first received a written understanding from the jeweler that he would take it back at any time, if in good condition. She is penniless, which for me is rather an advantage, as it enabled me to treat her with the ferocity which is so much part of my nature. It was no rash act. In all essentials, I think we were in complete accordance. Dame Laurentia wrote to me from Stanbrook, sending me her heartiest congratulations, though she did point out that it would prevent my ever becoming a monk. Some of my other friends were more cautious and warned me against matrimony. Perhaps I should have listened more intently to their advice, for I never really understood my wife, and her illness created serious problems for us both. When she was 44, after only 9 years of marriage, she developed disseminated sclerosis and was confined to her bed. And the rest of her life was clouded with increasing helplessness and pain. We had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, Christopher.
What news from Stanbrook have you heard from Sister Laurentia?
Only a few lines about the election.
What election?
Haven't you heard? The Lady Abbess died last week, and there's an election on the 24th. I felt sure she'd have written to you as well.
No, not a word. How dare she? I'm quite jealous.
Oh, I expect she's been extremely busy.
I wonder what it's like, an election at Stanbrook.
All very solemn, I gather. They vote in church, behind locked doors.
Perhaps they indulge in some form of ecclesiastical electioneering? Do you suppose they do? Do you suppose they hoist up their skirts and run around the abbey carrying banners? Vote for Sister Sulpicia and short prayers. Sister Anne stands for cutlets on Friday and breakfast in bed 3 times a week. Vote for Dame Laurentia, the enclosed nun. With the unenclosed mind.
My dear sisters, this is the first time that I have the right to address you. And my first word is of thanks, not for the honor, although it is a great honor to be an abbess of Stanbrook, but for your confidence and for your generous confidence. I can quite easily, without a great act of faith, make a return in kind. And I want to say at once that I have the deepest confidence in this community as a whole and in each member. A bishop said, when elected, "I have heard the truth for the last time," meaning that from henceforth he would be flattered or perhaps only half informed. There should be none of that between us. An abbess should be able to hear freely and to speak freely. It is a wonderful thing to be the spiritual mother of 80 souls, a very ennobling responsibility, for we have a great tradition and a great inheritance to uphold.
A friend came to supper yesterday evening and entertained us with the following story. A rich lady died in Egypt, and her nephew, having first ascertained that the will was satisfactory, cabled that the body should be embalmed and sent back for burial in England. The coffin arrived in due time, but when they unscrewed it, they were dismayed to find that it contained the remains not of the aunt, but of a Russian general who had died and been embalmed at the same time. They telegraphed to Russia to ask that the mistake should be rectified, and got back the answer, "Your aunt buried with full military honors. Do what you like with the general."
That puts me in mind of a story Cardinal Gasquet told us when he returned from America. A certain man's mother-in-law went to Denver for her health and there died. A message was sent to the son-in-law, "Mother-in-law dead. Shall we embalm, cremate, or bury?" The answer came, "Embalm, cremate, and bury. Take no risks."
I'm seeking God. Where can I find him?
My dear Sister Laurentia, as you know, Charlotte and I were in Africa recently. One day we were out in a car that was unfamiliar to me, and instead of pressing the brake, my foot found the accelerator. In my confusion, I braked violently. My wife was thrown forward, the luggage fell on top of her, and she was badly knocked about. As a result, we had to spend several weeks in Neisner while she recovered. And during that time, I wrote a little book that I think might interest you. It is about a black girl, converted by a missionary, who demands where she is to find God.
Where is God?
Seek, and ye shall find him, is the only direction she gets. So off she goes into the forest, a knobkerrie in her hand. And her search is only too successful. She comes across the God of Abraham and the God of Job, and I regret to say, disposes of them both with her knobkerrie. She meets Ecclesiastes, the preacher, she meets St. Peter and St. John, and then she finds your friend, whom people call the conjurer, because they won't listen to his preaching, but they like his miracles.
Take this and drink in remembrance of me.
Thank you, Bass. Thank you kindly.
He gives her his commandment. Love one another. But that is not enough for her, for there are people whom she hates and knows that she ought to hate. And as to loving everybody, even if it were always possible, she thinks it's a great liberty to take with them, and doesn't want everybody to take the same liberty with her. A little later, she comes across the conjurer, stretched out on a cross, acting as a model for an image carver who pays him 6 an hour, that being the only way he can earn his scanty bread. He is talking to an Arab, Muhammad.
Why do you do this, my friend?
What else should I do if I'm not to starve? People refuse to listen to me unless I do conjuring tricks for them. They tell me what a wonderful man I am and that there has been nobody like me ever on earth, but they carry on being wicked and foolish and cruel all the same. It makes me feel that God has forsaken me. Sometimes.
Finally, she comes to a villa with a garden which a frightfully intelligent-looking, wizened old gentleman is cultivating in a rather amateurish way. On hearing of her quest, he remonstrates with her and confesses that if God were coming to see him, he should hide in the nearest mouse hole. And besides, he says, you need not hunt for God. He is always at your elbow. This impresses the girl so much that she goes into the garden and helps the old gentleman to cultivate it until he dies and bequeaths it to her. Shall I give you the book or not? It is very irreverent and iconoclastic, but I don't think that you will find it fundamentally irreligious. Perhaps I shouldn't disturb the peace of Stanbrook with my turbulent spirit. But since I want you to go on praying for me, I must, in common honesty, let you know what you are praying for.
Although I believe in many of your ideas, I could never forgive you if you were to publish that book.
The Adventures of the Black Girl in Her Search for God by Bernard Shaw.
How kind of you. Thank you very much.
I'm afraid to present myself at Stanbrook. This black girl has broken out in spite of everything. And here is an inscribed copy of the first edition. Forgive me?
The fact is, our points of view are so different that either talking or writing around the idea can be of little use. The only way you could comfort me would be to withdraw the black girl from circulation. I don't think that you can realize how deeply you have outraged the feelings of those who, like myself, believe in God and our Lord's divinity. These things are not vital to you, but they are to millions. And there are things that are too sacred to be played with.
Let me explain.
If you had written against my father or my mother, you would not expect to be forgiven or received until you had made amends. I implore you to suppress this book and retract its blasphemies, and thus undo some of the evil it has wrought. You know how much I have valued our friendship, and how deeply I have believed in you. Is this precious thing to be sacrificed to a book that is unworthy of you?
Sister Laurentia, you are the most unreasonable woman I ever knew. You want me to go out and collect 100,000 copies of The Black Girl, which have all been read, and the mischief, if any, done? You think you're a better Catholic than I? Well, let me tell you that my view of the Bible is the view of the fathers of the church, and yours is that of a Belfast Protestant, to whom the Bible is a fetish and religion entirely irrational. Laurentia, has it never occurred to you that I might possibly have a more exalted notion of the divinity than yourself? Do you think that God didn't know what he was doing when he inspired me to write The Black Girl? What happened was this. When my wife was ill in Africa, God came to me, and God said, "These women at Stanbrook, they plague me night and day with their prayers for you. What are you good for anyhow?" So I said that I could write a bit, but I wasn't good for much else. So God said, "Take your pen and write what I shall put into your silly head." And when I'd done so, I told you about it, and you were not pleased. So I went to God. "The abbess is displeased." And God said, "I am God, and I will not be trampled on by any abbess that ever lived." And I said, "Oh, but she's a very obstinate woman, and there's no use you're going to have a talk with her unless you agree with everything she says, exactly as they taught it to her when she was a child." So I leave you to settle it with God and his Son the best you can. But you'll go on praying for me, won't you? No matter how surprising the results may be.
She did not reply. Shaw's travels often took him past the gates of Stanbrook Abbey, but he never stopped, never looked in to make his peace. Friendship flags if it is not kept warm, and there seemed to be at an end. Then, over a year later, he received through the post a small buff-colored card with the inscription, "In memory of September the 6th, 1884 to 1934, Dame Laurentia McLaughlin, Abbess of Stanbrook."
To the ladies of Stanbrook Abbey, Worcester. Dear sisters, I have just received the news of the death of Dame Laurentia McLaughlin. I had no knowledge of the state of her health, and no suspicion that I should never see her again on this earth. There was a time when I was in such grace with her that she asked you all to pray for me, and I valued your prayers most sincerely. I wrote a little book, which to my grief shocked Dame Laurentia so much that I dare not show my face at the Abbey until I was forgiven. She has, I'm sure, forgiven me now, but I wish she could tell me so. In the outside world from which you have escaped, it is sometimes necessary to shock people violently to make them think seriously about religion. And my ways were too rough. I have no right to your prayers, but if I should occasionally be remembered by those of you who recall my old visits, I should be none the worse for them. I'm very grateful. Yours faithfully, G. Bernard Shaw.
I first set eyes on GBS when he was lecturing at Hammersmith in 1886. Well, fairly good, I thought, but nothing wonderful. We met 3 years later, and we've been friends ever since. Although Shaw is a great and wise man, vociferously acclaimed and appreciated throughout the world, he's not above committing the occasional howler. Indeed, his letter to the nuns at Stanbrook could, I suppose, be classed as a super howler. However, as Shaw himself once said, the man who's never made a mistake will never make anything. He wrote his letter on October the 3rd, and the reply came by return of post.
My dear Brother Bernard, as you see, I am not dead. I have been celebrating my golden jubilee in the habit, as we call it, 50 years as a nun. That little card is a souvenir of the event. At such a time, my mind recalled old friends, you among them. When you are next near Stanbrook, you will come and see me again. You have my daily prayers. I hope they will have nothing but good results in the future.
I thought that you were in heaven, happy and blessed, and you were laughing at me all the time. Oh, what's your revenge for that black girl, Laurentia? Oh, Laurentia. How could you? I renounce all the beliefs I have left.
Poor Brother Bernard.
Queen Mary came to Cambridge and paid a visit to the Fitzwilliam. I was privileged as director to show her round, and I found her very appreciative and affable, though she speaks with a German accent. I'm justifiably proud of my work at the Fitzwilliam. When I first took up the appointment, the arrangement was utterly barbarous. Good and bad pictures, all schools and countries mixed, packed up on the walls to a ridiculous height. My predecessor had absolutely no taste whatsoever. You only had to look at his house to see that. And he hadn't the least idea how to run a museum. He simply looked in occasionally to see if there were any letters. I found the place a pigsty and turned it into a palace. But of course, this didn't make me fearfully popular at Cambridge, because I was determined to have my own way. The trouble was money. We had to raise large sums of money, a task which I accomplished with considerable skill. My secret was very simple: never allow the possibility of a refusal. I would select my man, preferably someone with lots of money and no children, and get myself invited to dinner with him. And then over the wine I would say, what's going to happen to your collection when you die? They hardly ever refused to help me. I was told that Queen Mary dwelt continually on the beauty of the Fitzwilliam. On her drive back to London, I think I could have made a friend of her if I'd gone to Buckingham Palace and written my name in the book. She might have sent me a photograph and asked me to tea. Good heavens!
I've been making a study of the tango. I learnt it when I was on holiday in Madeira. The promenade. The position and courage of the head is extremely important. It must be kept erect with the chin tilted slightly upwards. The man who taught me believes that it owes its origins to the war dances of ancient Thebes.
Very improbable, in my opinion.
This is the third figure of the tango, the Media Luna.
I'm most impressed.
Oh, so you should be. Dance. Dance every day for at least 15 minutes, and you'll be as fit and supple as myself.
I think the nuns would be rather alarmed if I did.
Oh, Oh, there's something else that happened in Madeira that I meant to tell you. I met an American there. He was immensely impressed that I knew you. It appears that his passion in life is plainsong, Gregorian chant. And that little book of yours, The Grammar of Plainsong, is that it? Told me that people came from all over the world to consult you. I had no idea you were such an expert.
It is my life's work. When I was a girl, I went to the Abbey of Salem and heard Gregorian chant for the first time. I fell under its spell. For centuries, chant had been regarded as a barbarous survival from the Dark Ages, and I was determined to do all I could to restore the singing of the divine office to its original beauty. Of course, it's no easy task to be at your vocal best 7 times in the day and once in the night. But a chantress never stops singing.
Much amused by a story of Sargent, the portrait painter, it seems that he has a screen in his studio behind which he retires at regular intervals to put out his tongue at his opulent sitters and shake his fist at them. Having relieved his feelings in this way, he emerges smiling, and nobody's a penny the worse. Oh, by the way, we have a new maid. Her name is Maysod Tryphena Wesley. Why does that please me so much?
It was such a delight to see you shining in all your old radiance. If ever I write an opera libretto, it will be rather like Die Zauberflöte, and I shall call it The Merry Abbess. On the drive back here, it was a magically lovely evening, or so it seemed to me. I felt so much the better for your blessing. There are some people like Judas Iscariot who must be damned as a part of heavenly business, and it is clear that I may be one of them. But if I sneak into heaven behind you, they'll be so delighted to see you that they won't notice me.
Wherever you go eventually will depend entirely on yourself, and you'd be wise to choose heaven. People aren't sent to hell. They go there because they choose that fate. Anyhow, neither of you is going to the wrong place if I can do anything to prevent it.
I've heard the most astonishing rumor about Mrs. Shaw, whom I know quite well, or thought I did. It seems she took a violent fancy to Lawrence of Arabia, and that they exchanged a number of frank and revealing letters. I find this almost impossible to believe. And since it was I who introduced Lawrence to the Shaws, I also find it rather disturbing. How unpredictable is human behavior. I remember old Thomas Hardy, when he was 84.5 years old, falling violently in love with a young woman who was appearing in an amateur performance of one of his plays. For a time he was completely infatuated with her. Mind you, Mrs. Hardy, the second Mrs. Hardy, was dull beyond description, an inferior woman with a suburban mind, so perhaps it wasn't entirely surprising. But even I, who've never been described as a ladies' man, even I have not escaped the grip of these troublesome emotions. There was one particular afternoon, a young woman had called to see me. I'd promised to show her some of my books. It was in the 20s, 23 or 24. In those days, a curtain divided my study from the room where Kate lay, ill and crippled. I could hear her moaning with pain, an agonizing sound. And she suddenly called out to me, "Sidney, when is the nurse coming back?" "Oh, not long now," I said. Then suddenly, without thinking, I seized my young visitor and kissed her fiercely on the lips. She said nothing, simply left the house without a word. It reminded me of what Thomas Hardy told me one morning. One of the first rules for a writer of fiction is that it must never be made so strange as fact.
I am in straitened circumstances to the extent of being overdrawn several thousands to meet the war taxation. And the success of the Pygmalion film, instead of making me rich beyond the dreams of avarice, has put me in the millionaire class, taxable 19 and sixpence in the pound. I mean, to get 10 guineas, I have to make 420 pounds, which makes me think twice about sums that I could afford to throw about before the war. Charlotte is badly crippled. The result of an accident she suffered in her teens, and she's incurable. Because the only remedy, the steel corset, plaster jacket, immobilization for months, is bearable by men under 40 only. She's an invalid. A sentence of lumbago for life. Music is a great comfort to her. I play the piano and sing to her, sometimes in the evening. Oh, the War Office wants to publish 3 of my plays to stimulate the troops and prevent them from going mad. I've given them carte blanche and the use of my type, free, gratis, and for nothing. I'm getting old, but as well as can be expected, I can still write a bit.
In this beautiful September, it's hard to realize that a hideous war is in progress. Although we have aircraft overhead all day. Oh, what a welter the world is in. How terrible it is to think that every man's hand is against his brother.
Another of my windows has been smashed at Kew, as well as the conservatory. Every post brings news of some friend whose house has suffered. The longer the nights get, the more time there'll be for the bombing. After dark, it's almost impossible to stop them. Oh, thank you so much for the sprig of lavender. I always keep it with me in my pocket diary.
Mr. Bernard Shaw has received such a prodigious mass of letters on the occasion of his wife's death that though he has read and values them all, to reply to each individually is beyond his powers. He therefore begs his friends and hers to accept this omnibus reply and to assure them that a very happy ending to a long life has left him awaiting his own in perfect serenity.
We have a young Italian working for us in the gardens who rejoices in the splendid name of Concenzo Malatesta. He came to us as a prisoner of war, and he's absolutely devoted to the place. He declares that we are his father, his mother, his brothers and sisters. He's just returned from a visit to his mother in Naples, who would not believe until I wrote and assured her that her son was working in a convento. He's returned laden with gifts of fruit and cheese, and for me a gold ring, which he presented very shyly, wondering if I would accept it, as if I would think of refusing. The ring is adorned with a large R for remembrance. It fits me perfectly. I think of wearing it in bed.
Dearest sister, tomorrow is the 22nd anniversary of our blessed and never to be forgotten romp in London. I remember it all so clearly, every detail. Most of all do I remember that joyful morning, September the 7th, 1922, I first received your letter telling me that such a trip might be possible.
Dear Mr. Cockerell, I am altogether plain-songy at present. I have been invited by the Abbey of East Berkholt, Suffolk, to give the nuns a month's choir training.
I am greatly excited to hear your news. If you have to pass through London, could I not meet you at Paddington Station and pilot you across the city via the British Museum? It's halfway to Liverpool Street.
How nice of you to be so keen about my news. There are still some formalities to be completed. Leave from Rome is required for the expedition, but I'm sure they'll be settled in time.
I'm keeping next Thursday free to meet you at Paddington. What I would like to know is this. Would you like to bestow all of your time on the British Museum? Or would you like to visit the National Gallery as well? Or Westminster Abbey? Or etc., etc. Are you just an ordinary mortal on your way through London? I mean, could you lunch in a public restaurant? Or should a more secluded and holy place be found?
My train is due at Paddington at 9:50. And I leave at Liverpool Street at 5:42, so that gives us a good day. I'm very keen to hear Mass in Westminster Cathedral. Could you please take me there? And then show me something of the Abbey before midday. Would this be very troublesome to you? Please be frank.
Of course, I shall be delighted to fall in with all your plans. What fun to have you in London. It'll be a very busy day. Well, we did it all. You heard High Mass in Westminster Cathedral.
And then we went and looked at the view of London from Westminster Bridge.
In the afternoon, you were shown privately, under the best official guidance, some of the principal manuscript treasures of the British Museum.
The Lindisfarne Gospels, Queen Mary's Psalter, and the Lambeth Bible.
Then at 4:40 the motor was ready, and we drove across London and got to Liverpool Street, arriving just in time.
Oh, my dear Sister Laurentia, a few weeks ago I had a visit from another very special friend whose vocation was as widely different from yours as any two vocations can be. He is Gene Tunney, Irish-American, still famous as the undefeated heavyweight boxing champion of the world, no less. He was brought up a devout Catholic. Family, pillars of the church, but as he puts it himself, when I went into the ring as a professional, I dropped all of that. Although he dropped the faith did not drop him. Anyhow, he made a fortune from his fights, and when he retired, he married a rich woman. Sometime later, they found themselves on a holiday island in the Adriatic, where his young wife was attacked by that rare complaint, unknown to most surgeons, of a double appendicitis. Nothing but a major operation could save her, and there was on the island only one old and useless doctor. Death was certain within 10 hours. Jean, helpless and hopeless, could only watch her die, except for one thing: to go back to his faith and pray. He prayed. Next morning, early, there lands on the island the most famous surgeon in Germany, the discoverer of double appendicitis. Within hours, Mrs. Tunney is out of danger and is now the healthy mother of 4 children. Protestants and skeptics may see nothing in this but a coincidence. And as far as I'm concerned, it only goes to confirm what I instinctively feel to be the value of your prayers. So, do not forget me in them. Although my body is going to bits, I have passed that second childhood that comes at 80 or thereabouts, and got the clear second wind that follows it. My soul still marches on.
Dearest friends, Kate had a slight stroke last month. She lost ground, became unconscious, and this morning, to my great relief, the end came. I'm thankful that her life was not further prolonged, as I think it was a happy one on the whole, despite those more than 30 years of disabling illness. I'm also thankful that I did not go first, as it would have made things so very difficult for her.
Dearest Sidney, there is no need to say how deeply I sympathize with you and your family. I am with you in thought and prayer.
Many years ago, when the children were quite small, Kate wrote me a short but heartfelt letter. What episode or incident prompted her to do so, I've quite forgotten. It often grieves me very much, she wrote, that you don't try to see more of the children. Because if you don't make intimate friends of them now, you never will. And that'll make you awfully unhappy. Dear Kate, she was a remarkable and courageous woman. The funeral was very simple. We took some of her books with us to the crematorium, the 5 books that she wrote as well as illustrated, and we looked over them for half an hour in turn, and then came home. I went to bed early, feeling thankful that a difficult day had passed off so satisfactorily.
On a tree by a river, a little tomtit sang willow, tit willow, tit willow.
And I said to him, Dicky bird, why do you sit singing willow, tit willow, tit willow? Is it weakness of intellect, birdie, I cried, or a rather tough worm in your little inside? With a shake of his poor little head, he replied,
Oh, willow, tit willow, tit willow.
We have to face the fact that we are a very poor lot. Yet we must be the best that God can as yet do, else he would have done something better. I think there's a great deal in that old pious remark about us all being worms. Modern science shows that life began in a small, feeble, curious sort of way as a speck of protoplasm. That owing to some will in this, some curious driving power always making for higher organisms, gradually that little thing, constantly trying, wanting, having the purpose in itself, being itself a product of that purpose, has, by mere force of wanting and striving to be something higher, gradually, curiously, miraculously, continually evolved A series of beings, each of which evolved something higher than itself. What is to be the end of this? There need be no end. There is no reason why the process should ever stop, since it has proceeded so far. But it must achieve, on its infinite way, the production of some being, some person, if you like, strong and wise, with a mind capable of comprehending the whole universe, and with powers capable of executing its entire will. In other words, an omnipotent and benevolent God.
Dear Brother Bernard, the lavender harvest has just come in, and one of my jobs is to pack it into little bags for our sale of work. I hope the fragrance will keep you in mind of Stanbrook, where you are so affectionately remembered. The prayers still go on.
The thought of Stanbrook is a delight to me. It is one of my holy places. I'm going to die now.
I think I was his oldest living friend, and though I shall miss him very much, I was thankful to hear the end had come, for I knew that he was eager for it in his last uneasy days. I had a very deep esteem for him. He had all the attributes of a gentleman: unswerving integrity, consideration for others, generosity on the sly. I went up to Golders Green for the cremation, the first time I'd been in a train for 9 months. There was no religious ceremony. The organist played one of Elgar's Enigma variations, and Libera Me from Verdi's Requiem, in accordance with the wish expressed by Shaw to Lady Esther. In between these two performances, I read very badly the final words of Mr. Valiant for Truth from The Pilgrim's Progress, a book greatly admired by GBS all his life. When the day that he must go hence was come, many accompanied him to the riverside, into which as he went he said, "Death, where is thy sting?" And as he went down deeper, he said, "Grave, where is thy victory?" And so he passed over, and all the trumpets sounded for him on the other side.
What a mystery friendship is, and how strangely and delightfully one's friends differ one from the other. Some we have to carry, others carry us. The perfect friend to my mind is one who believes in you from the start and never requires explanations and assurances. True friendship is one of the subtle and beautiful forces that glorify life.
Dearest sister, think of it. We've now been friends for more than half our lives. What a strange and lucky chance brought us together. And how easily I might never have known you. I've been laid up a good deal this year. A little heart trouble, a little discomfort, but no pain to speak of. And I have plenty of nice visitors and do not repine, though I feel a bit spent and good for nothing. And how are you, my dear? I hope you can send me a better account of yourself.
Dearest Sidney, I have been unwell too, but I am better now. Although I go rather piano, and locomotion is mainly in a wheelchair. thank you for your so beautifully written note. I trust it did not tire you too much.
Grievous news from Dame Laurentia. She's dangerously ill with congestion of the lung. This may be the last letter I shall receive from her. But it's written in a firm hand, and she says that she's holding her own.
When thou shalt pass through the waters, I will be with thee, and the river shall not cover thee.
A very great lady is dead. Strengthened by the rites of Holy Church, she gave up her soul to God on the 23rd of August 1953, in the 88th year of her age, the 69th of her monastic life, and the 22nd of her rule as abbess. Hello? Hello? Yes, what? Yes, yes, Cockerell speaking. You'll have to speak up, I'm extremely deaf. What books? What exhibition? No, it's quite out of the question. I can't possibly lend you my books for the exhibition. I've sold most of them anyway. No, I shan't change my mind. There's no possibility of that. I'm expecting to die quite soon, and if I lend them to you, it'll cause the most frightful complications. What? Yes, I'm sorry. Goodbye. Another winter gone, and I'm still a prisoner to my room. I'd expected to be dead by now, but I'm content to live on until I become too great a nuisance to those about me. Except for a little weakness in my chest, I'm feeling distinctly better than I did a year ago. I attribute this to my doing next to nothing. I once used to think I was rather a smart young man. Now I realize I was always second-rate, a born intriguer and puller of strings. And that's how I strove to justify my otherwise useless existence, by bullying people more gifted than myself and getting the best out of them. Still, I've had a very interesting life. If it weren't for Kate's lamentable illness, I'd be very glad to have it all over again. I remember going for a walk once with two of my children when they were between 6 and 7. Margaret asked who made God and what we were before the world was created. Then Christopher asked, when we were dead, should we remember being alive? Margaret thought we might live again as birds. Then she said, after we were dead, should we become part of history? Perhaps I shall soon have an answer to all those questions. I leave to my children a number of the best and kindest friends, both men and women, that ever man had. Gratefully conscious of all they have meant to me, I declare friendship to be the most precious thing in life. But it's like a plant that withers if it is not heedfully fostered and tended. It's only by constant thought, by visits, by little services, and by abundant sympathy at all times that friends can be kept. I implore my children to remember this, so that the blessings that have been mine may be theirs also. A young man called to see me to talk about Ruskin. Young man, very shy, eyes stone deaf, so he didn't make much progress. A wasted morning. Slept from 9:15 to 5:15. My best night for ever so long. But woke feeling weak and silly. The angel of death seems quite to have forgotten me. On the other hand, I might pop off tomorrow. Who knows? Da-dee-da, dee-dee-dee, da-dee-da.